would your life look like if you asked yourself, what if? Hello and welcome to another episode of Challenge Your Mindset. I'm your host, Nura, and if you're listening to this off of Anchor, Spotify, or on YouTube, you'll notice that this episode is a little different than other episodes because there is a visual attached to the audio, making this a video podcast episode, which is thrilling for me because I had to jump through many mental hoops to get to this point. I had to question all of my fears, asking myself, why am I actually afraid to do this? What is my thought process? What's stopping me from doing this? And it kind of made me think, people have so many fears. You know, there could be a fear of flying, fear of heights, fear of spiders, fear of public speaking. And actually, public speaking is a very big one. People are afraid of speaking in front of an audience because they don't know how people, for example, are going to perceive what they're passionate about. They might say something that is controversial. They might, say something that might trigger something in someone, or something as simple as even asking a question in class. I remember when I was in college, I would get nervous before asking the question in class, whether it be a class of 20, 25, 50 people, or a class with hundreds of folks in there. I would get nervous, the process of just thinking about what my question was, how am I going to articulate this question, and, getting my hand ready to raise it up high so the professor can choose me so I can ask my question. There was so many thoughts that were going through my head. And I would finally have a chance to ask my question, and, that adrenaline rush starts to slow down, my heart stops racing, and I'm finally calming myself down as the professor is responding to that question. And in that process of actually getting myself to calm down, I'm not really paying attention to the professor's response. It kind of feels like you're listening to someone when you're underwater. And, you get to a point where you're eventually calm enough and the professor asks, does that make sense? And of course you have to say, yes, it does, because you don't want to engage in that loop-de-loops process once again. And I think one of the bigger fears of asking a question for me was, am I going to look dumb in front of my peers? Is this a good question? Was I not paying attention and that's where this question came from? Or did I just not understand a very simple concept and I didn't want to look like a fool? And this may sound familiar to a lot of us. One of our fears is, how are we perceived by others? Because we are social beings, we always think about others, right? We're thinking about what this person might think. We're thinking about how this person might perceive us. It's an idea that's stuck in the back of our heads, consistently nagging us. And, sometimes when I would ask my question in class, I would hear, a couple of students be like, yeah, like they also didn't understand a concept that I'm asking about. Or, someone whispering, that's a good question, because they also didn't understand the concept. And that would make me feel a little bit better, because it's like, yes, other people also had a hard time understanding this concept or also had a similar question to me, and that would make me feel a little bit better. And the question that stops us from doing what we want to do is this question of what if. And that's exactly what we'll be talking about today. What would your life look like if you asked yourself, what if, after this short break? And we're back. So before we hop into the question of what if, we need to understand that beautiful brain of ours. Our brain is very intricate, which makes it such an amazing organ to be working with. It is responsible for your whole body's functions and how you perceive others and how others perceive you. And so it's responsible for our interactions and our overall being, as me and you have already known. So our brain wants to keep us comfortable. It wants to keep us alive. So when it sees something good, it wants us to keep doing whatever it is we're doing to continue to be on that good side. If it perceives a stimulus that could be translated as something that would put us in harm's way, then it wants us to avoid that. Like if you touch the stove, it wants you to avoid touching the stove when the fire is on. As we know, there's a fight or flight response, and this is how it works. Your brain sees a stimulus, right? Because your eyes are connected to your brain. So your brain is seeing that stimulus, or it perceives something in your surroundings that could be translated as a danger. And so your amygdala, a part of your brain, is responsible for that fight or flight response. So it perceives that, and then it sends a signal over to your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary gland. Your pituitary gland sends a signal to the adrenal cortex, which is this little thing on top of your kidneys that essentially sends cortisol to the rest of your body. Now, cortisol is the stress hormone. It's responsible for like telling the rest of your body how to react to this situation that we have. And now you're officially stressed. I think a helpful way of looking at the world and making sense of your stressors is by asking yourself, what if? What if is typically associated with worst case scenarios. Let's say you get in front of a crowd to say some type of speech that you prepared and you start panicking. As one does. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of? And keep asking yourself, what if, until you get to the root cause of the problem. What do your fears actually stem from? What is asking what if going to reveal to you? So let's start with the what ifs. Let's say you're getting ready to go in front of this crowd and you're stressing out like you've never stressed out before. Let's go down the list of what ifs. So why are you panicking right now? Well, I'm panicking because I don't want to make a fool of myself in front of this audience. What if you make a fool of yourself in front of the audience? Well, if I make a fool of myself, then they might perceive me to be not exactly competent in my field of study. Well, what if they perceive that you're not competent in your field of study? They might not invite me to come to their events again. Well, what if they don't invite you to come to their events again? Well, if they don't invite me to come to their events again, then I might not be able to go to other events because this gets publicized by word of mouth. Well, what if you don't get invited to other events? Well, then I might be back to square one where I need to publicize myself and get myself out there more. Well, what if you have to do that? Well, I guess that's rock bottom. So worst case scenario, what we're understanding is worst case scenario, you're going to have to start over, whether that be republicizing yourself, having to start over on this journey just because of one shaky performance. Worst case scenario, one shaky performance, you have to reformat your publicity. Okay, well then let's look at best case scenario. Best case scenario, what if I don't sound shaky? Well, if I don't sound shaky, I'll come off as confident. Well, what if I come off as confident? Well, then people will hopefully like what I say because I'm confident. Well, if people like what I say because I'm coming off as confident, I might be able to influence their thoughts. Well, what if I influence their thoughts? Well, then I might be invited to come back for another speech. Well, what if you do get invited to come back for another speech? Well, this might skyrocket my career because they're very influential people, yada, 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 and you could keep going. And so best case scenario, your career skyrockets because of a speech that you did very well, and you might be invited back. Okay, so we had the worst case scenario, we had the best case scenario, but you have to realize that both of these scenarios all stemmed from actually taking action, from actually going and giving that speech. What is the result of that speech if I do good? And what is it if I do bad? What ifs on both sides? But we rarely ever consider what the price would be if we don't act. We always consider the price of action. We don't consider the price of inaction. So let's take that into consideration for a minute. What is the price of inaction? What is the price of me not doing the speech? So I may never get invited again. Okay, what if I don't get invited again? I won't get similar opportunities in the future. Well, what if I don't get similar opportunities in the future? Well, then I'll remain exactly where I am now. Okay, so what if you remain exactly where you are now? Well, if I remain exactly where I am now, I might not level up my career and won't be able to do the things that I want to do in life. Oof. So this is where it is. The price of inaction is not being able to do what you want to do in life. And that's rough because the price of inaction is not doing what you want to do in life, which is worse than your worst case scenario, right? So when we were saying the what ifs with your worst case scenario, the worst case scenario is you just having to start over. Worst case scenario for inaction is staying exactly where you are and not leveling up in life. Worst case scenario, try again. Worst case scenario, stuck. I would say that the price of inaction is worse than the price of action. Life is about the experiences that you have. Being comfortable is great, but experiencing life is even better. Whether you succeed or fail, at least you can say that you tried. Every decision that you make in life is a decision that will affect your future. Taking action is a decision, and inaction is also a decision. One of them is easier for your brain and body than the other, but the other will make your body feel more fulfilled. A decision that you make today can be the catalyst for a life that you would have never imagined. And asking what if can help you get to that point. And so for this week's mindset challenge, I want you to grab a pen and paper and ask yourself, what if? Go through your what ifs and ask yourself, what are you truly afraid of? What's stopping you from doing what you want to do? From doing something that might help your future? From doing something that will allow you to level up in life? Ask yourself, number one, what is the worst case scenario? Number two, what is the best case scenario of action? And number three, ask yourself, what is the price of inaction? So let's do this with an example. Let's say you want to start a business, and starting a business can be very difficult, and your brain is psyching yourself out. Let's think about it. Let's think of first the action. What is the worst case scenario if you took action, if you decided to actually act and start a business? So worst case scenario, my business fails. Okay, what happens if my business fails? Well, if my business fails, then I will lose the money that I put in. Okay, so what if you lose the money that you put in? Well, I wouldn't have that money, so that's where we stop. Okay, so let's think of best case scenario. Now at best case scenario, I start a business. Okay, you start your business, best case scenario, you start making profits and your business skyrockets within the first year that you launch it. What happens then? Well, then maybe I'll make it as a Fortune 500 company. Okay, if you make it as a Fortune 500 company, maybe I'll be able to go on the cover of Time magazine. Okay, you go on the cover of Time magazine. Okay, what if you go on the cover of Time magazine? Well, then I could be an inspiration to others to do the same and help others out of the rut that they're currently in. Okay, so best case scenario, you inspire others and become successful. Fantastic. So we looked at the worst case scenario, best case scenario. Now let's look at inaction. Let's look at the price of inaction. Okay, so where are we right now? Well, if I don't start a business, then I'm going to continue working in my current job as an employee. Well, if I'm an employee, then I don't really have all the autonomy that I would like to have. And I will continue to be an employee, never the employer. Okay, so what if that happens? Well, then I would never be making the big moves. Okay, so if you're not making the big moves, what if you're not making the big moves? Then I'm always relying on someone else to make my decisions for me. Okay, so if someone's making the decisions for me, that is worst case scenario for me, and I will stop there. So right now, worst case scenario is I'd be stuck exactly where I am being an employee instead of an employer, versus the worst case scenario of losing some money that I put in to actually create something that I wanted to create. Which one do you think is worse? And each person is different. What I think is worse might be different than yours, but to me, it's worse to be stuck than to lose money, because money comes and goes. But being stuck exactly where you are is worse than trying something new. And so for this week's mindset challenge, I want you to go through your worst case scenarios, best case scenarios, and what is the price of inaction, and write down all the what ifs that you can come up with and ask yourself quite seriously, which one is worse? Remember that inaction is bland and action is risky, but life is about risks. So ask yourself, what if? This is all I have for you for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Challenge Your Mindset. Follow this podcast wherever you may cast your pods by hitting that plus button. You could also follow us on Instagram at Nura_unplugged. That's Nura, Nora_unplugged. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you have a fabulous day and an even better week, and I will see you next week.